Record to the cloud. Welcome to the weekly R511 radio show or podcast show or webcast show, however you want to call it, coming to you live streaming from Bloomington, Indiana, with a guest this week from Indiana as well. But he's out there in the mountains coming to us in probably the county where people live the longest, and that's why he's hanging out there. If he's in Logan, Utah, I think that's where people tend to live, like almost to 100 or whatever. But,
actually, I'm in Utah County, which is a little bit different than Logan, so that's about an hour and a half away. Yeah. Okay.
Which way? North, south, east, or west?
It's north from us.
North. Okay. Yeah. They might even live longer to north.
I'm right across the lake from Rick West and BYU.
Okay.
So yeah, I can see White Mountain from my house.
I have to visit sometime.
Oh, I've
been to Utah once. It's been a long time ago. And other than that, just been airports. But we're in week 7. We're in module 8 of a 13-week course, 15 module course. So we're a little bit over half now. And if I share my screen real quickly with you, I can get it on up here. I had it up here before. Okay, I opened up a file, so that's going to mess us up. But we can see how many times that Tim's article has been cited that we're going to read for this week. 2,194 times. This article by Peg Ertmer and Tim Newby, Behaviorism, Cognitivism, and Constructivism, comparing critical features from an instructional design perspective in Performance Improvement Quarterly, which, according to Dr. Newby, is the most cited article ever at one, or at least at one point in time, in PIQ. And if we look at week 7, I said week 7 is the strong, or week 6 is the strong week that I don't want to throw away. We got Brown, Collins, and DeGude looking at situated cognition. Then we got the people at Vanderbilt looking at anchored instruction, and Lave and Wanger looking at communities of practice and legitimate peripheral participants. And then we had Dr. Tom Reeves last week as a guest talking about their work on authentic learning. And last semester, I had Barbara Lockey as a guest talking about the ACT Legends and Legacy videos. Well, this week is just as good as week 6. This is week 7. I'm looking at this stuff. And, you know, I had Ellen Wagner, who's now the head of AECT, as a guest last semester. She's an old friend of mine, along with Barbara McCombs, talking about learner-centered principles for distance education. Keith Sawyer is a creativity expert I cover in a different class. Perkins and Solomon are cognitive skills, context bound. In the Ed Researcher, I've been, you know, that is a classic as well from 1989. That was a highly read, and I bet you that's cited 10,000 times. Scott Gravinger was our guest 2 weeks ago in here, Rich Environments for Learning. Bonk and Cunningham, you might know something about those, at least one of those people. That is the most cited chapter in my 1998 book on electronic collaboration. And Marcy Driscoll was a guest last semester as well, former dean at Florida State. And we've covered her chapters before in this class. And Tom Reeves and his wife, Tricia Reeves. Tom was a guest last Sunday. So, you know, here we're sitting there with all the people we know or have had as guests, and we didn't have Peg Ertmer or Tim Newby. And here, lo and behold, that's who we have this week. So, you know, you have to read every article for week 6 and 7. You don't have to read any other weeks of the semester. You can just let it slide. But those 2 weeks, 6 and 7, really situate you. Now, we did do instructional design earlier this semester, Tim. We covered, you know, Charlie Raylu's elaboration theory and David Merrill's work and Dick and Carey and all that, because this is an intro class for the Ed Tech or IST folks. But I'm trying to make it more than an intro class. And I got a combination of things that people are doing. They have access to open educational resources and free books. All these articles are freely available within Dropbox for them. I'm trying to bring in guests to supplement and to connect to the articles that they're reading and hear about the making of the article or why they actually did, you know, came up with that. So there's a kind of a giant circle pie chart with a whole bunch of pieces of pie that they can chew on or select from, and don't have to eat every piece of the pie to get an understanding of this field. But I'm really delighted to have you here with us. And Dr. Newby hit the send button like within 5 seconds when I invited him and said, well, thank you for inviting me in. I want to talk. I've been wanting to talk to Indiana people for Bloomington people for a long time. I'm hanging up here in Purdue, 2.5 hours or 2 hours away. So Tim has been producing a lot of books in this field. I went back here and it's like 1980. He had his first book, you know, and he must have been in 5th grade, but, you know.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, about 12 is when I got to Purdue. Yeah, that's it, right?
Yeah, 1980. Preferences of Mexican American children for parents or television. Well, that's a journal article. That's not a book. That's a journal article. But there's a book, I think, that early on.
There's Manipulating Parents, I think was the name of the book.
Yeah.
And it ties in with the stuff that that is in this article because of my background. It's
okay,
really
well, then maybe you could start us off by making a link between their 1981 book, Manipulating Parents, and you know, Melissa wants to know, well, maybe she doesn't want to know how, maybe Renee wants to know how to manipulate parents, what tactics are used by children to manipulate their parents. So what led to something to
as weird as that? Well, when I was in grad school, I had this professor that he asked me one day. I was in his undergraduate class, and it was just a basic research class. His name was Paul Robinson, and he just said, "You know, what are you doing with your life?" He sat down next to me. I was, I don't know, running some kind of experiment or something. And he sat down next to me and just said, "What are you doing with your life?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I'm thinking maybe becoming I was a psychology major, but I said, maybe becoming a school psychologist." And he says, "Oh, so you want to fill out forms for the rest of your life, huh?" and I'll never forget that. And he said, "Listen, why don't you just follow me around for a couple of days and see?" And so I did. I followed him around for like 3 days. I skipped my classes. I just watched what he did. And I was convinced at the end, I wanted to be a professor. That seemed to be like a good idea at the time. So we did that. Now, I was at Brigham Young University. And there I was and he was in the experimental psychology department. So I just followed him into there, went straight from my undergraduate to a PhD program in experimental psychology.
Very young, oh man.
Yeah, so anyway, so we went straight into that. And then, and so all of my background then was in heavy learning theories and very behavioristically oriented, because that was a very strong element there. But a couple of guys that would pull us towards the cognitive viewpoint a little bit, but there was psychobiology, there was cognitive information processing, and really, really heavily behaviorally oriented. In fact, later on, I was the lab coordinator, and the lab coordinator there is I ran all the rats, all the pigeons, these Harvard rats that I swear were this big. These
you
big,
really ran rats and pigeons?
Oh, so, yes, I did.
I met B.F. Skinner.
Oh, is that right? Oh,
I worked with his daughter and son-in-law at West Virginia. They had the offices next to me on each side. They didn't want me being hired. They didn't want any kind of guy hired. They actually went to the dean's office to stop me from getting hired. But I talked to him I was looking for Julie, and he answered the phone very briefly. But he died shortly after that. It was 1990 or so.
Yeah, right in there.
Yeah, right in there when he gave the last psychological address for APA, and then
that's what we read all the time, stuff about Skinner and how it worked and stuff. I had the meanest pigeons that you can ever imagine. We had aggression studies with pigeons, and you had to wear these big stiff gloves because they'll break your fingers if you reach in to get them out of the thing. It was just that kind of thing. So I went all the way through studies until I passed off my prelims, passed off the qualifiers, got to writing my dissertation and realized, do I really want to be running rats for the rest of my life? And then there was the young lady by the name of Panay Stewart, and I'll never forget her. She says, "Come see what we're doing over in education in this area known as learning design and technology." And basically it was instructional design and development is what they call it, I guess. And so I crossed over
back in the day, but today it's learning
back in the day.
Yeah.
Little did I know that, a couple of years before that, Charlie Reigeluth had graduated from that same program. David Merrill was there. Paul Merrill, very influential in what I did, and whose wife was a sister of Larry Wood, and Larry Wood was on my committee in experimental psychology. And so there was all these connections going on that happened there. And then all of a sudden I realized that, hey, this is really kind of cool, some of the things that they're doing over there, which was very oriented to the same things that we were doing with the rats, but it made a lot more sense to me because we were doing it with children, and we were doing it with with corporate individuals that needed to learn certain things. And we started designing instructional materials. And I saw that crossover. And that's one of the things that's in the article that I thought you probably should really make sure that you pay attention to. There's a little piece in there it's a quote from Glenn Snellbecker. I can't remember. It's one of the exactly which page, but he says you cannot afford the luxury of restricting yourself to one theoretical position. And that always impressed me, that when you go into this practical area that we deal with, which is very practically oriented, you really can't pin it down to one. You can't say that I'm a behaviorally oriented instructional designer. It just doesn't work. Yeah. But the principles of behaviorism, or the principles of cognitive information processing, or the principles that you can learn from that, from constructivism, all of a sudden, when you start looking at those, given the situation that you have, now it starts to make sense. And that was where this whole idea of this article came from.
Well, wait a minute for a second. Charlie had the office next to mine here at IU until he retired. So I know Charlie very well. And his was the first book I read as a graduate student, the Green Book. And
the Green Book, of course, yes.
First Green Book, of course. I was at Wisconsin with Michael Streibel, and he made us read the Green Book. As boring as what it was back then, I was a former accountant, so I know about forms, and I wanted to escape forms and rituals and procedures and step-by-step approaches. So the methods in the late 80s, early 90s were not something I embraced. Let's put it that way. I was looking for something much more learner self-directed in nature. But I found the quote in the last page. In closing, I would like to expand on a quote by P.B. Drucker, Schnellberger, 1983, Schnellbecker, 1983.
Yes, Schnellbecker.
These old controversies have been phonies all along. We need the behaviorist triad of practice, reinforcement, and feedback to enlarge learning and memory. We need purpose, decision, and values, and understanding the cognitive categories. Less learning be mere behavioral activities rather than action. Add to this, we would add that we need adaptive learners who are able to function well when optimal conditions don't exist, and things are more unpredictable. Yeah. And if you read the end of this article by Pager Ertmer and Tim Newby, they have a number of areas where they talk about the significance for instructional designers, that there's no one best approach, there's no one best theory, and people are always looking for that one best or the most efficient method and so forth. And the answer is, it depends. And I wish I would have had that answer when I was in New Zealand and I was asked on national TV about the state of e-learning. And I mumbled something. I should have just said, it depends. It's a great, it depends is the answer you always need. You always have to have in your back pocket.
That's right.
It is really appropriate. And so, go ahead, Tim.
I was just going to say, before I forget to tell you that this article was originally put out there in 1993,
right?
Which is probably before many of these people were even born. Okay, so, but in 20 years later, in 2013, it was reprinted in PIQ. And then at the end of the article, we put about a 4 or 5 page update.
Oh,
so there is this little update there at the end of it, so that if you want to get the updated version, which is now 9 years old or whatever, you could go in there. And we basically just said there have been some huge changes in technology, huge changes in actually the learners because of the technology, and also in the teaching strategies that we come up with from that. And but we still went right along with the same thing. It depends on what you have there, as far as what theoretical position or elements that you can use that are most effective for the situation that you're within.
Well, last week we talked about John Seeley Brown in his article on situated cognition in 1988 and 89, first with Bolt, Berenick, and Newman, a white paper, and then in 89, an ERA presentation and Ed Researcher article. 20 years later, he had an article written in EDUCAUSE Quarterly called Minds on Fire, talking about participatory learning, talking about the Web 2.0. Same kind of thing as your article. It was so popular 20 years later. My friend Ron Ostin at York wrote the first article in Ed Researcher on the use of the web as a tool for learning back in 1997. And the Ed Researcher people had him come back a decade later to write an update. And I'm on the board now, and I've been trying to get that researcher to do a 20 or 25 year follow-up, and Ron's willing to do that. But this is what happens in the field, anyhow, is So can you go ahead?
I think, well, one thing I was just going to say is, I think it shows that we shouldn't forget what's already been done. Because when you're dealing with learning, that's a really important element, that what's back there still can be very helpful. Now, in today's world, we can see how it's changed and it's adapted, and it's perhaps polished a little bit better and put forward, and maybe we can see things better. I think a really good example of that is constructivism. Back when we talked about it in 1993, it was something we really wanted to believe in, but we really couldn't enact it very well from a teaching standpoint because we didn't have the tools to allow students to do things so they could show that creativity and show how they could do it. But now we've got those tools. And so now it can be utilized by the common person to a much greater degree. The common teacher can use those tools to show that our students really are constructing and how they're doing it and the impact of that. And it's allowing them to do that. So yeah, it's done, but you can't forget other things. I've been doing a lot of work lately with Rick West out of BYU on micro-credentials and the need for micro-credentials. Yeah, and there's some really, well, why am I interested in micro-credentials? Micro-credentials, if you break them down, are stimulus response, and you add a reinforcer. I mean, you can interpret the whole thing that way, and it works really well. Same thing with computer games and gaming elements and stuff like that. Well, you add those kind of elements in there, and all of a sudden you get people churning and investing effort and stuff. And okay, well, this is kind of interesting. If I didn't know anything about behaviorism and how that works, I wouldn't understand why you can change some things and really have an impact on the way in which they do it, even though we're working in today's world where that may not be. Yeah.
That makes sense, but what explains your work on wikis then? Because it's not was your work on wikis behaviorally based?
No, I don't think so. I think that was more of a, hey, look at this. This looks really cool, and I like the idea of with the wikis is that we were all of a sudden just joining all of these pods of information together. We had a blast with the project. A couple of things that we did on that. We set it up so that students, it was in my undergraduate beginning educational technology class. And this was still a number of years ago. So we didn't have all the Zooms of that day, or it wasn't as easy. We could still communicate with individuals around the world. But we went all over the world and connected with universities, and we had those students join in with our undergraduate students to build certain parts of these wikis. It was, here's a Web 2.0 technology, how would you use it? And so we would set it all up so that we could make it for teachers, and then we would connect with people at an international, and how would you use it in Russia, or how would you use it in Manchester, England, or how would you use it? And they would show us their different take on it. It was really kind of came together, but it was all of this coming together and just throwing these things in. And it was kind of like building a concept map type of thing that was just growing like crazy.
We did a wiki book, and I think I sent you articles from Indiana. We did 2 wiki books in 2007, one on learning theories, one on the Web 2.0. And the Web 2.0 one, we had students in China at Beijing Normal, in Taiwan at National Chaodong University. We had students at Indiana State. So Renee might know some of these places. Indiana State, and then Indiana, and Open U of Malaysia. And then a decade earlier, I had students in the COW project, Conferencing on the Web. We had pre-service teachers writing cases of problems they see in Indiana schools, and then they'd solve each other's problems. And we had students from Finland, Korea, Peru, Warwick University in the UK, University of South Carolina, and Texas A&M, all collaborating. We ended up calling the Interplanetary Teacher Learning Exchange. So we were doing similar things in both those projects, kind of global, using tools for global collaboration, sharing, negotiation, perspective taking, social cognition, kinds of things.
And when we wrote the article in 1993, we weren't even dreaming in that direction of the possibilities of connecting like that and having my students connect and all of them coming together. We used to rent out one of the ballrooms at Purdue and have a poster session, but it was required that you had to bring your international people with you. So they had, we didn't have Zoom and that, but we had them connect through different types of whatever. And so the people going around looking at it could talk with the students who were contributing from wherever they were. In Oxford, we had students working there, and they would tell their point of it. It was wild.
Wow.
But it allowed us to do something that I know my students would never forget, and they could construct it, and they just tried different things. And that's what the technology allowed us to do.
Adobe Connect.
Yeah.
Mostly, so I was an early piloter, and Ellen Wagner used to work at Adobe, who's now the head of AECT. And so she had me pilot Adobe Connect. Other people use WebEx and, whatever tools,
yes.
live meeting.
Yeah. And then there's other kind of experiences that we have. Pandemics have a tendency to try to shove us towards something new too, and getting better at, this is much more natural for me to talk with a class, even though you people all have your cameras turned off. So I have no idea if you're really there, if you're off looking at something else. But we just get used to it and just start talking back and forth and have a way of carrying on our conversation. And in some ways it's a better way of doing it.
So can you send me the updated article so I can share with all my students, because that would be really valuable to them. And I want to make a little announcement. So Renee posted in the chat window the article on manipulating parents. Sounds interesting. Last year when I taught this course, I had a couple of weeks where I had an ask anything, Tom anything. So let's make this kind of like that. So, if Tim doesn't mind, if Dr. Newby doesn't mind, I'm going to say you can go ahead and type anything you want to know about career development, interviewing for jobs. It doesn't have to be about this article. Anything about what's like working at Purdue for over 3 decades there, I think, or approximately.
Oh, it's 38 years. I'm in my 38th year. Yeah.
30. So it's
whoever goes to a place anymore and stays for 38 years. Maybe your grandfathers did that, but nobody else does that. Purdue's been a wonderful place for me. But I got to know people like Krista Glazewski. She came and worked here for a while, and now, we lent her to IU.
Lent her.
Yeah.
Yes. So right before coming on here, Dr. Ann Leftwich, who's now our department chair interim, she says hi to you. She came on and says, Dr. Newby was my advisor.
Yeah,
so our department, right. This is our department chair's advisor we're talking to today. Nobody knew this. It's a little tidbit.
Yes, and Bill Watson and Sonny Watson both were graduates of your program and are now very important professors here in our program. So there's a lot of interchange. Marissa Exter is also here that we got from you guys. I mean, it's back and forth and lots of cross-pollination between the two universities. And like you said, we grow because of that. It's fun to have colleagues like this that we can exchange with.
One of the reasons, Purdue's gotten to be a better campus, as I see it, over time, because it's getting more beautified. A lot of more trees than when you first got there.
Oh.
But it also, you have you've always had good people, but people like Sonny and Bill Watson are just pumping out the research right and left. I'm so proud of both of them. I mean, Sonny, I gave some advice to before she was on the interview circuit and all. I think I was observing her teaching or something like that, but I'm glad to see how successful that she's become, and both of them have been.
Yes, they are.
But Purdue has something that we don't have, and not much of. We now have an engineering school, but it's a certain segment. What Purdue gets is a lot of engineering education grant money. And so a lot of IU people get hired, maybe a postdoc or maybe it might be a full-time faculty position, but it's something you might want to consider, getting some experience in that area, because if that funding is not going to go away if the infrastructure is approved, that's been talked about. So
it's a huge area and it's big for our area, and that's what Purdue needs to take advantage of, is that we have all of these scientists, these engineers, and they're all over campus. Purdue's engineering program is bigger than, as far as the faculty goes, it's for many small universities.
Yes.
It's the same size as Purdue's engineering area. They have so many different engineers. And so we take advantage of that, and we're being invited to join into many of those grants that they're doing and those kind of things.
Renee, why don't you jump in and ask your question?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, Renee.
Hi. It's been like wonderful to see you here. As I listen to your conversation, I'm just wondering, like 30 years dedicating to the program and the field, what would you say has sustained your passion or your professional development over the years?
It's easy for me. At first, it was the articles. It actually was. It was the research and that kind of stuff. But there is nothing that impacts me more than to watch my students get it. It's when they struggle, they're trying, they're fighting against it, and you can somehow lay it out, give them certain experiences, and then all of a sudden you can see it in their eyes that they get it. It happened to me, and I was always very appreciative of the people that impacted me, but I still today get that huge thrill from talking with individuals and seeing them grow and watching them do things. I can tell you a couple of experiences this way if you give me a chance to tell a couple of stories. One of them I can tell of a young graduate student. Well, she was a teacher. She was a special education teacher. Her husband came to Purdue to get his doctorate in audiology. And she didn't have anything to do. Her kids were finally she has 4 kids, and they finally all got into school. And so she decided she would come over and take some classes from us. And eventually she got into our PhD program. And she was so reserved in many ways. She wanted everything to be perfect. So she would refuse to turn in hardly any of her work because, I mean, she would turn it in, but she was just really hard you had to pull it out of her hands to take it away from her because it had to be perfect each time or whatever. And that was Peg Ertmer. And Peg Ertmer was my student. And when she went through it, and I watched her, when she wrote this article, she was still a graduate student, guys. She came to me and said, it was a class assignment where we started it from. And she had been working with Dale Shunk, who, if you notice that's based on 5 key questions in that article. And she said, those are key questions that I think that it was a theories class. He said, can I ask those questions for each of it? And I said, yeah, but you've got to extend it further into the area of instructional design. And so she extended that further. But to watch her grow and to mature and to all of a sudden become the individual that she is. I mean, it wasn't very many years later where I gave her a manuscript of something that I was working on, and she wrote back and she says, this is like crap. You haven't thought through this very well, you know? And she graded me on what was going on.
Renee does that to me all the time.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you get it. And it's this mentoring, you know, and all of a sudden you realize that this protege that you have is well beyond where you are, and they've flourished and gone beyond. And that just gives me this huge, really this wonderful feeling of accomplishment. And it's all the I don't know, feedback that I need so that I keep going. There's the rewards right there. Now, the other story that I was going to tell you is what happened to me as a graduate student. And you guys are probably grown at this, and maybe I'm giving Kurt some new ideas of what he can do. But this actually happened to me. And I tell my students this, I tell my advanced graduate students this sometimes. My major professor is Paul Robinson. And Robinson, he knew I was working on my very first publication. I'd analyzed the data. I had done all of the stuff that needed to be done. I went for months to the library. This was before there was no word processing, guys. There was no, you typed it out on a typewriter. Okay, so if you made a mistake, you ripped out the page and you started the page over. If you wanted to make a copy, we did have copy machines, but other than that, So I would go to the library at night and I would go and pull off the journals. I would mark them. I would take them to the copy center, and the next morning they would have them all copied for me because it was open all night long. And I would pay out of my meager finances. I would pay for those. And I would work on these articles. And it was my very first article. I'd gone over it. I thought, this is the best I can do. I took it to him and I said, I want you to read this article. And he said, before I'm going to read it, I want everything that you've got. I want all of your notes. And they were all hand done. I want all of your notes. I want all of your copies of your articles, everything. Bring it in a big box, bring it to me. So like a dutiful graduate student, I put it all together. I took it to him and gave it to him. And he took it, he put it behind his desk, and he says, good, now go out and write it again. And he didn't give me back any of my notes. He didn't give me back any of the copies, nothing. I had to start from square one. And I went out and redid it. I was not happy with him. I took his name in vain a number of times, I'm sure. And so I went out and I rewrote it, and I came back and he said, okay, I want everything. And I said, yeah, right. I didn't take him anything. I gave him a copy of the thing. And I said, no, I kept all of my stuff. you know, fool me once, but you're not going to fool me twice here. And so I handed it to him, and the box that I'd given him before was still sitting behind his desk. And he reached down there and he grabbed the first copy, and he had the second copy, and he handed it back, both copies to me. He said, now write it a third time, and then I'll read that one. And that's what he did. He read the third version, and the third version was 10 times better than that first version and 3 times better than the second version. And it was published very quickly afterwards with very little revisions and stuff. He was teaching his graduate students something that needed to be done, hopefully just one time. But it was that process of mentoring. Some people couldn't stand that kind of mentoring, but in my case, he knew me well enough that he knew that that's what I needed. And so that's what it was. And so that's one of the reasons why I teach my students the way that I do. Although if you ask Anne, she'll tell you that I'm a really nice guy. She better.
She did tell me you're a nice guy.
Yeah. All right.
Renee,
so
you have a follow-up? You have
yes.
a follow-up, Renee?
Not right now, but thank you for sharing the stories.
Okay, yes.
Those are very, very sweet and very interesting stories.
Well, my real, all my motivation goes right back to my students and the love that I've had for my students. And I have had wonderful students. Oh my goodness. I think I've graduated, I don't know, maybe 40 PhD students now. And they've gone all over, and they're very, very effective at what they do. I have, you know, Peg and Ann, and I think 4 of my students have already retired. I don't know about that. You know, that's weird. That's like out of order. They're supposed to wait till I retire.
That means you've got some energy pills that we all want.
Yeah. Well, good. That's a good way of saying it. Or I'm just too dumb to get out of it. You know? Yeah. So anyway.
Some people have continued energy, and that's important, and we need that. So, Renee, where are you coming from? Because that doesn't look like you're part of campus or anything. So, where is that?
Oh, I'm by the Crumble Cafe, the plaza.
Crumble. Oh, you're near my house, actually. Okay, you're by Crumble, by our Renwick, yeah, and C3, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I run to there and back usually, but. It's a beautiful area. So does anyone else have a question for Dr. Newby while we're telling stories here? Claudio.
Yeah, Claudio.
Dr. Newby, thank you so much for being here today. I was just going over the article that you published in the updated version of 2013.
Yes.
And there was a quote that just got my attention, and it says, "Today, with the use of available technologies, individuals from geographically diverse locations can form communities of learners to develop multidisciplinary solutions to important problems." So my question is, have you seen those kind of contexts growing in the last years, like more multidisciplinary projects that combine different fields with the use of technologies? For example, I used to work at Arkansas State University, and we had a lot of people that were combining literature from our foreign language field that was about Spanish with history and with other different fields. So we were creating kind of using technology to communicate with people in different rural areas to create more of these multidisciplinary projects. And it was kind of different contexts and different type of education. So I was wondering if you have seen something similar in the fields, or if this area is growing.
I think that it is growing. I think it's had to grow. Once again, the pandemic has forced some of that, so that we're almost all at a distance. And so some of that has happened. A quick little example that we're having now, we've got one of those governor's grants for emergency response. I know that IU has one of those too, where we're building instructional materials for teachers that have been forced into becoming online teachers or hybrid teachers, and they haven't really wanted to and stuff. So, but one of the things that it's allowed us to do through this technology is that we're bringing teachers in from all over, even though they're still teaching in their classrooms, but we're able to bring them and get their expertise. So now, instead of me trying to get a teacher in Tippecanoe County, we can also get one in very rural counties. We can get them up north and up by South Bend. We can get them over, and we bring all of those teachers together, and they have common issues, but they also have specialty issues that otherwise we would not all of us wouldn't understand. That was just, when they come together and they start talking about that, and boy, we're all learning from each other. And it's been really, really fascinating to hear those. And that's even kind of at a small, that's all within Indiana, where in the old days, we probably would have said, okay, let's meet in Indianapolis and we can come together, but and try to do that. Now we're just doing electronically. So I think that's helped to facilitate the overall area to do that. And the technologies allowed us to do that to a greater degree. And then referring back to what Kurt and I were talking about, that wiki that we developed, that was an early on idea where we were bringing students from universities all around to come together and work together on a common goal. And that was a real fun thing to see develop and I do it. The things that can happen now, where we're breaking down language barriers, for example, when you see different types of technology where students can talk and it comes out in the language that the other students can understand at the other end, wherever they are. And now all of a sudden you don't have barriers of language. You can get right down to things that they want to know about the other students, and they don't have to worry about language getting in the way. And so cultural comparisons can happen much quicker and stuff. So I'm seeing that as potentially a really fun area to be going into, to thinking about and stuff. So just some ideas anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's great.
Claudio, you're coming to us from Dallas?
Yes, I am from Dallas. Yes.
I keep picking it as Austin, that it's Dallas. And remind us who you work for down in the Dallas area.
I used to work, and I'm still working for Arkansas State University. I give online courses in Spanish and literature, but I used to do that face-to-face 5 years ago. So I kind of got tired of college town. So I came here into Dallas. I was hired by a private high school. So I'm keeping those two jobs and I'm doing the EDD right now. I'm traveling abroad because I ran 5 study abroad in Mexico and in Peru. So, yeah.
Amazing that you can do it. I have a son and a daughter-in-law who both live down in Panama. And she's a UNICEF diplomat. So she runs all of South America and Central America. She helps with the training that they need and that type of stuff. But my son's job is the real interesting one. He's on the emergency response team for education. So wherever in the world there is countries that are in conflict, such as they're having a civil war, or there are natural disasters, he and his team will go in and evaluate where is education, how many schools are still available, how many are still standing, how many teachers are still alive, how many students are going to school versus those that are not, because schools are so important for the stability of the country. If you have kids going to school, as we found out through the pandemic, if you have kids going to school or not going to school, that causes all kinds of good things, or it can be really serious if they're not. And so he has that kind of thing. The only way that they can do a lot of this work now is through online and through other technology means to get into certain places. Otherwise, I mean, he's been into Syria, he's been into all kinds of different areas to explore that. A weird job, but it's one that just has to happen so that they can get the money where it needs to go to get kids back into school. So.
And Melissa has a similar position. She might jump in here at some point, but I think before that, Kevin has had a question up for a while. So Kevin first, and Melissa, you can form your question after. Kevin, you want to jump in here?
Sure. Thanks for coming and visiting us today, even if it's electronic. You mentioned about your fond farewell with the pigeons and pivoting away from that. Yes. And it brings to mind my question is, that was a fairly significant change for you. How has within the field that you're in now changed over time? As you look at the research you've done and things, how has your original thoughts about the field changed to where you're at now?
It's trying to think of specific examples or whatever. From where I was early on, I had an experience early on where I spent 2 years as a missionary, okay? And where I spent 2 years out teaching people certain things. So really, and that was before I finished my undergraduate degree. I think that's what embedded within me this idea of teaching and how much I enjoyed the teaching area. Up until then, I never pictured myself as a teacher. So once I found the area of instructional design, it was these basic understandings of how I can get people to invest effort into something so that they can get from one step to another, to take a step up in whatever they're learning or whatever. And that, I think, has remained the same of how we, not how we do it, but why we do it. That is still the same. People today understand that learning is still as important as it was back in 1993 or 1984 or wherever it was. We studied learning for hundreds of years and why that's there. So it's really an important thing. But what's kind of exciting now is to see the possibility and the potential of these tools that will allow us to explore in areas that weren't available to the common person before. I mean, just think about what teachers now have at their disposal, or what most kids have just because they have a cell phone. And the power that they have, that they can do certain things. Yes, there's all kinds of other things that it introduces because of that, all the distractions, all of the other things. But because they have that access to the information, that just extends the possibilities that what they can do. And I think that's what probably has led me to where I am. I don't know if I'm fully aware of all that can happen in the future or the very near future with artificial intelligence and some of the things that are there. We're just starting to see things there, but that's going to be a huge area that is going to open up and is going to really have a dramatic impact on our field, for one. I mean, just think of the training that's going on now and some of the things that are happening because of the AI that's being imported and integrated within some of the things that are there. So it's going to have greater impact, but that core idea of advancing, helping individuals take from one step to the next, that's the key thing that is there and still is there for me anyway. Yeah, I don't know. I've kind of gone all the way around in circles. I don't know if I answered your question or anything.
No, it's perfect. I think it's interesting, even to hear how it's explained is fascinating to how the mind changes through the whole process.
I think that, what is this? I'm going in 10 different directions. The basic understanding of how people learn and that kind of stuff and the basic motivation stuff are still there. I do believe that if we're not careful in certain ways, we can take away some of the stuff that is needed for good learning. And so you have to be careful. I mean, just as the technology is there to help us extend ourselves. Let me give you a weird example, okay? Okay, well, back when I was in graduate school, so many years ago, we had to do really hard things, which you guys don't have to do anymore, okay? Okay, one of the things were statistics. Back in my day, we had just left the slide rule section to actually having calculators. They were very basic calculators. My stat professors used to tell me, you are so lucky. We used to give people a quarter of a problem to do a night from here, but now we give you one or two problems that you can crunch into the calculator. All right, well, people today use these computers that just, you put in the data set and then you can run all different kinds of stuff. But back in my day, I had to write out all of the rows of how all of the rows and the columns of all your data set. Yeah. And then you started hand calculating it. You actually could start to what I call feel the data. You could feel what an analysis of variance was actually doing. It was in this, or a t-test or whatever, because you saw it on your piece of paper. You had it there and this is what it is. So you could explain it really clearly. Today's people can plug those numbers in and press a button and it's there, but they can't explain how they got it, just that the computer program did that. Yeah. All right. Okay, so now you say, well, then they're not as smart today as they used to be because they had to go through that. Well, not necessarily. What they do is because you've got that number, you can ask a lot deeper question, a lot greater question, because you're in a position to be able to do that. And that's where we are. Some of that basic understanding still needs to be there. And we still need to be able to teach our people about that so they can have a basic understanding so they can hear the data talking to them or whatever they're working with. But at the same time, because of the tools, we can now ask questions that we're never able to ask before and get an understanding of a level that is above and beyond. It's, galaxies away from where we could have been before. So there's that wonderful thought of getting way out there, but at the same time, still needing some of the basic foundations too.
You see, Kevin, you understand where he gets his energy from? Dr. Newby is a kid in a candy store, and we're all kids in candy stores.
Yeah.
You know, I had from 2004 to 2008, the Kelley Business School said, oh, you can research whatever you want, and I'll hire some of your people, and we'll fund the research, and whatever you want to look at, you can go ahead and look at. And we were all kids in candy store, we were, you know, just, and they hired 3 of my grad students, well, my postdoc, and 2 of my grad students got full-time hired. And just, they had grown from 12 students to 1,000 and didn't know what to do with all that extra, you know, $52 million that they were in income or whatever it amounted to be. And so we got more than a dozen studies done, well more, and 20 presentations around the world. It was a fun time, but we were all kids in candy store. We want to look at motivation. Okay, we'll look at motivation of instructors. We want to look at case-based learning. Okay, we'll look at case-based, you know, we had to be thoughtful and planful, no doubt.
Yes.
But, you know, but still, sometimes it does feel like going back to the penny candy and bringing our nickels and dimes that our grandfathers and grandmothers gave us and getting as much candy in our pockets as we could, you know. Research is like that. Some days you have gold, you know, you have golden nuggets you just mine forever. The Cow Project was a gold mine of research. You know, not many people could run that system. It was 1996 or 97. It was the system that it ran on, the platform that it ran on was that old AT&T. I'm trying to think what it was called. Not, you know, and so my cowmaster, the guy who he just showed up one day, he had worked for Northwest Airlines in Minneapolis and a Unix. So he knew how to run a Unix system. And we had cows on a server in the School of Ed hidden in the Center for Research on Learning Technology on a computer on the side. So no one even knew. And when he graduated, we were still running studies and all this stuff off of the cow server, you know. And you know, sometimes you have these things, that opportunities that knock, and you just got to take advantage of them while the going's good. There's plenty of dry days where, you know, you know, in this field though of educational technology or instructional, the heyday is here. It's, you know, it's the past 30 years have been the heyday, and it's not dissipating anytime soon. It's only going to increase, I think. And it's difficult for Tim and I as researchers to decide what is the next area to pursue, because you want to make sure it's a good one, so it's worthwhile, and that it's purposeful, and that it's impactful, and all that, right? I'll let you.
I totally agree. I think that a key part of that is that yeah, we are in our heyday. It's because of the practical nature of the area of study. It's not very hard to explain to people what you do. They quickly grasp the need for it. Even if you are a kindergarten teacher that's coming into a master's program, they want to know about it, they see the relevance of it. If you're a trainer that trains CEOs of major corporations, they see the relevance of it.
Right. It's
because of that. And it's a new enough area that we know the guys that founded it. I knew Gagne. I knew, you know, they're not that far away from us. And they had some really good ideas. They said it came, if you look at instructional design, it came right out of World War II. Why? Because they needed to train airmen as fast as they possibly could. They had to have somebody not telling them all about the theories and stuff, but understanding the theories so that they could put things down on paper so that they could learn it as fast as possible, as efficient as possible, and as effective as possible. And that made sense. And from there, we've just gone and we work at it. Where do I think we could be even more effective? I think that colleges of education need to have instructional designers integrated even better than they are. We're still, I don't know about you at IU, but we're still seen as kind of the other sister that we don't really understand. In fact, in some cases, it wasn't too long ago that we were called the PowerPoint people. And I didn't even appreciate that at all. But, you know, because you knew a little bit about just the technology. Well, it's not just the technology. It's, you know, it's how to integrate that technology that's important, you know, and how to make impacts on it and stuff. So slowly people are starting to, even in the College of Education here at Purdue, is understanding that the need for what we're offering. But it's that practical.
Thoughtful integration.
Yes,
and that's just,
thoughtful.
you know, So last week we came up with a list. I headed it of the graduates of our program that are teaching in higher ed right now, and also the adjuncts and those retired. There's 130 or 123 people who are full-time, you know, and as instructors in higher ed, or were and moved into administrative positions. That's not counting the corporate people. That's just USA, okay? And it's not counting the international ones. So, yeah. You know, a lot of the associate dean wanted to see this because, you know, they were just totally impressed by that. They didn't realize how impactful the program has been to other universities around the country. Yeah, again, between Purdue and IU, the number of people who are placed in universities around this country is immense.
It is. We've had a huge impact.
In IU, the state has funded technology well. And so we were the most wired or most unwired. Purdue was, Ball State was, DePaul was. There's something in the corn that it's not true of K-12, but at a higher ed level, they understand the need to be, you know, technology equipped. So
it's been a fun ride. I have to tell you, it's been a fun ride. You wonder why somebody can stay at a university for all these years. They just keep me happy. What can I say? I'm to that point where I could leave it at any time, and everybody keeps asking me, when are you going to go? And I said, when it stops being fun. That could be a long time from now.
Well, Melissa hasn't asked her question. You know, I want to make sure that she has. We're running at 6:55. I got so. Yep. Melissa, do you want to jump in here? And Xiao, do you also have a question for Dr. Newby? I'm wondering. Put your questions in the chat window if you can, Xiao.
Hi. It's very interesting. No question. Thank you.
Sure. That's just fine. Sometimes I sit and I don't have many questions either. It just kind of goes over and plays with you for a while. But if you do have questions later, Kurt will send you my email. It's real easy, newby@purdue.edu, you know, that kind of thing. So just send me a note. All right, I'll be happy to talk to you that way.
Okay.
Before Melissa jumps in, go ahead. Before Melissa jumps in here, I want to make a comment. The professor who made you put your article away and go write it without the notes.
Yes.
There's research in the creativity camp, and the guy who was in Monty Python, who was an instructional designer afterwards, the lead in Monty Python with the dark hair. Anyways, John Cleese.
John Cleese? I didn't know he was an instructional designer.
He was an instructional designer.
Oh my gosh.
Or he had a company that did instructional design.
Did that? Okay.
Oh yeah. It's not that long ago, actually. Well, he, in one of his speeches, he gives somewhere where he said, you know, where people have forgotten, you know, or they lose their paper. They write the paper and then it gets the computers, you know, they didn't save it well enough. The second time they write it, it's a better draft than the first time.
Yes.
You know, it's that old principle of, you know, you got new thoughts marinating in your head and you're putting them together in unique ways, and having the first one was a dry run and the second getting things unique out there. The first time just getting things on paper. The second time you really have integrated thought happening. So
it's those first 5 minutes after you realize that you've lost the first version, though, that is the scariest of your life.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I save everything as A and B. You know, I have 2 copies of everything, and I send it to myself before I go to bed. So it's in my email. If my hard drive goes on me, you know, it's somewhere. Melissa, do you want? We've been saving you for last year.
Oh, that's fine. Well, it's nice to hear you talking. I like your excitement about so many different things, because sometimes I feel like I'm all over the place in the things that I like to do and the things I enjoy. I really resonated with what you said about not just being the technology person.
Right.
Because I'm currently working as an ed tech specialist at the Christian Theological Seminary here in Indianapolis. So it's graduate theological work. And I was just looking at your little bio that Dr. Bonk sent us, and you are doing research or examining the impact of digital badges on learning and motivation in post-secondary. And I'm on a committee right now at the seminary looking at bivocational, what do they call it? Micro-credential type of things. For those who may already have a degree, they're already working in a church, or they are lay people working in a church and want to skill up. And I was just curious, do you have articles or anywhere that you could direct me to look at the digital badge impact? Because that's, you know, we're trying to look at that. Is that somewhere we want to go with our lifelong learning for bivocational ministers?
Yeah, I've got an article.
Before you jump in, Tim, is that seminary, is that right next to the Butler campus?
Yes.
So if you've been to the Butler campus and you exit out over to, I guess, Michigan, maybe, that you if you've ever been to, I don't know if you've been to
Yeah,
Butler.
You don't even have to exit Michigan. Butler, it's at Michigan and 42nd. We share our building now with the school, with the College of Education of Butler.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Just a context then.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So yes, I do. I published a paper in ETR&D. I think it was a year ago, maybe it was 2019, maybe somewhere in there, 2018, 2019. And it was where we basically talk about these micro-credentials, and then we did groups with and without those, and it came out to show you the differences and how the learning was impacted with and without. So that would give you an overall research kind of how to do it. But there are been some very good articles written about why you would do this and the function behind it and how you structure them in certain ways and some of that kind of thing. And I'd be happy to send some of those type of things to you. Some different ones that I've found to be really effective for that. So yeah, I think I've actually got one in a text, or there's actually a really good book that I just refer that to you. And if you don't have a copy, I can probably send one to you, or at least some of the chapters out of it. But IU probably has it in their library too. But it will really help you, I think, to see the whole idea behind it, and that it just, they're really simple. Micro-credentials and one of the best ways that I heard about micro-credentials and the benefits of them came from Colorado State University. And one of the things that they did there is that they had people calling into them all the time that they wanted to know about pruning, how to prune certain trees. They're a land grant too, or whatever, you know, how do you prune? And so the guy who was doing it got tired of calling and talking to him about it. He created a little badge, a little instructional badge. And basically what it was is how to prune a certain kind of tree, certain ways. And all you had to do is take a video of you pruning the tree a certain way, send it into him, and he'll tell you if you're doing it right or wrong. And you got certified by getting this micro-credential. Well, pretty soon they wanted the advanced version of pruning. And so he created the second one. And then all of a sudden they wanted some additional things. And they created like 10 of these credentials, micro-credentials that people could pick and choose. And pretty soon when they got those done, they realized that they could turn those into credit. And from credit, they got, with very short step, they were getting a master's degree in horticulture and that kind of thing. It was this stepwise thing, and it was just done in a natural flow of, because people were asking for it. And just exactly what you've got with your religious educators and stuff. They've already got their degree. They already know certain things, but they need to be upgraded in certain, well, then you create them this little learning module that they look at. They get that. And once they get that, they'll ask for something else. And then you add that to it. And pretty soon you've got a few things together. And once you get those things, then you're the master teacher or whatever it is, however you want to set that up as far as the credit goes or the certification. It's a good little way to put all of it together.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I see Kevin had a follow-up to his question that we skipped over. Would you like to jump in on that little comment that you have there, Kevin?
Well, sure. You guys were chatting about how things had changed, and you were bringing up the idea of technology being an important part of that. And that kind of led to my question of, is technology good or bad in it? Or is technology becoming the crutch for things, or is it truly, building the bridge? Obviously it can do both, but what is the trend that is being seen in in a lot of the designs and things that people are putting out?
As far as the answer to your question, is it good or bad? Go back to the article, and it depends. You know, that's it's both. Or it can be both. You know, there's some things now that we're opening up individuals' eyes and giving them experiences that otherwise, without the technology, they could never have, and they would never be able to reach the levels that they're going to be able to reach. So in all that case, then the technology amount, this can be, you know, this is a wonderful thing. That said, you can take technology in another area where it can do all kinds of damage. It can do all kinds of, I don't know about this, but here's an example, all right? One of them, back in the old days, before the internet, there was a time when they got this close to stamping out child pornography. They located in the places of the world where they were still printing it, publishing it, and they just about had it gone. And then the internet happened, okay? So that kind of thing that is going, can it be taken in the wrong direction? Definitely. There can be uses of it for whatever and that. So I just look at, I look at Twitter. I mean, all you have to do is something simple. Get on, you know, Purdue versus IU football Twitter, whatever, or basketball, you know? And there can be some wonderful things that are said there, and there can be some really horrible things, you know, that kind of stuff. It just is kind of a big waste of time, big distraction. And I hate to see individuals who are wasting good creative time on distractions that mean nothing, or lead you to be less kind in this world, or less, you know, have fewer real pieces of etiquette within your life, or whatever. You know, your ethics are slighted because of the time that you're spending there. I don't know.
So it's a good question, because I'm going to be rolling up a quote from my World is Open book that I want you to comment on, Tim. But in the section before that quote, I talk about these 10 deadly, the deadly dozen, 12 things. And a couple of them, you know, there was something called the evil house of cheat. And the evil house of cheat would let you buy papers and pay $7 a page. And I don't know, if you're going to spend $7 a page, I mean, you know, and some people spend, you know, like 3 hours putting together a label for a Coca-Cola can that has all the answers on it. If you're going to spend 3 or 4 hours doing it, you could just study for 3 or 4 hours and learn that stuff. But anyways, the evil house of cheat. There were Pink Monkey, something like that. There are all these services that you could buy. academictermpapers.com, cheatinghouse.com, all these, not Yale or not Harvard, I think maybe, or something like that. That's one thing that's problematic. And then, you know, you've got, you know, the copyright issues, of course, creeping up in terms of, you know, with all this access to open contents and education. So I have that in a section in the last chapter of the World is Open book, which was written for the layperson. It's my only trade book. But in the next section of the book, I talk about the audiences for the open world, for this open world. And one audience is theorists. So I want to put the quote up here. It's a little bit long, but I was going to read it, but now I found it. I have a PDF of the book, so I can pull it up and share my screen. And so it's similar to Dr. Newby's article. So if I can find it, here it is. Can you see that, Tim?
Now, yes, theorists.
So I'll read it, and I want you to comment on it, Tim. To theorists, there will be some who wish this book had focused more on learning theory than learning technology. As an educational psychologist, I too wish there were learning theories that could serve as magic lamps in the sea of madness. As Gabriel Solomon argued more than a decade ago, for the first time in the history of psychology, novel technologies have taken us to places which learning theory cannot explain. He further contended that we need both technology and theory. I believe it is time to shift from debates about which theory is best to the creation of engaging learning environments, for learning. No one theory explains everything. There are now millions of new learning resources and materials open to anyone online, and hence millions of new ways to learn. It is incumbent on all psychologists, technologists, educational scholars, and other interested parties to find, evaluate, and promote effective ways to learn with these technologies. What should be clear is that a more participatory and learner-centered style of learning is possible with web technologies. Learners can explore, design, remix, and share content. We all learn. That was the acronym. There are 10 trends I point out, and they spelled "we all learn." So you have to, so we all learn when theorists join the party instead of standing on the riverbanks, perpetually waiting for the next boat to arrive or bickering with those standing alongside them. So it's the last sentence there that's the one that, you know, the theorists are fighting with each other at least back in the day. When Tim and I got into this, they're always fighting with one another about the best approach, the constructivists with the behaviorists, and who knows? I mean, just we'd go to AERA and you'd see battles going on in front of the room between David Merrill and David Jonas, and we're reading from both of those people. So, you know, so I had to throw that in the book at one point. I'm curious, Tim, if you want to respond to anything there.
I absolutely agree with what you got there. I honestly do, because in the field of instructional design, we don't have the time or the energy to be spending all of our focus in one area as far as learning theories. We're faced with real practical problems, learning problems, because every learner is so different and they're bringing different things. You've got to be able to understand the background and pick from those that are most relevant for that situation in that learning context. The time of bickering back and forth, that was what I'd really noticed when in my graduate days. I was in the experimental side of in the building where there was experimental psychology, and that was exactly what was happening. Is that the cognitivists were just complaining about the behaviorists, and they actually had their rooms in different areas. They couldn't be in the same hallway because they would argue so much. And then I go over to the College of Education. They're dealing with students with certain types of problems. And they didn't know how to answer that, and it switched to focus on the student instead of arguing about the theoretical perspective. And that's what I actually loved, and that's what turned me on to this new area of doing that and helped me to understand it.
Yeah, and we had, when I got to IU, constructivists with more of the traditional instructional design folks, and then they splintered off and started learning sciences, and they came to my department, Ed Psych, and caused more disruption over there. And I ended up coming to IST. So, you know, there's many of these battles going on. I didn't want any part of the battles, or, you know, I was often asked to be the extra member of a dissertation committee because I was the only one that wasn't going to fight with someone else. They could get me as a safe person who wasn't going to start an argument or something, you know.
On my graduate committee, you had your three major people, and then they had a variable. It was somebody else that was added in, and you didn't have any say over who that person was. And I found out it was the secretaries that had a list, and they would just assign people. So for a semester, I kissed up to this one secretary, because I knew that if this one variable turned out to be the one that hated my major professor, I would be the sacrificial lamb. And I didn't want to have anything to do with that. So I begged her to make sure that guy was not in on my final meeting. And it paid off. He wasn't there. Oh, that was just, I was scared to death he was going to walk in, and all of a sudden there was going to be a battle, and I was going to be the one that lost all the blood.
Well, I've appreciated you coming in here today, because it's
been fun.
It's critical that my students read through your article and think about the issues that we raised, but just think about the practical implications of this field and where we're at today because of the pandemic, and many of not just the pandemic, but many societal changes have caused this field to rise in importance, not just at the K-12 level, especially at the adult learning level. As we live longer and have more jobs, there has to be more people looking at the lifelong, you know, what's called the 60-year curriculum, and how, you know, instructional design folks, learning technology and design folks can make an impact across the lifespan. And you know, you've been here for a number of, as you said, a number of years, and still are engaged in new questions. So there are a tremendous number of questions that, if you're a doctoral student in this field, that you can pose that are meaningful every dissertation, you know, we used to say your dissertation is best a good get done dissertation or a make an impact dissertation. When you're in this field today, there's many ways in which you can make an impact. You can do both, actually. And so that's really makes, you know, me excited to read dissertation proposals and the final product, because I'm seeing a lot of dissertations which really are helping and impactful for people across the spectrum.
And just remember, as graduate students, as you're looking at this, that paper, that lead author was a graduate student. She had questions and she wanted to put certain things in certain ways. And I just encouraged and went along with it. The most quoted or most cited article, you know, in the history of PIQ, your article could be that for some, you know, in the future. So this is a field that accepts good ideas. And so, you know, get your ideas out there and work on those and develop those. So
I had to walk away and let a bug go outside. So I missed that point. She was actually a grad student when this article, I thought you were saying before this article, but when this article.
When that article, she wrote it for my class. Yeah. And
wow.
Yeah, she wrote the outline of it for my class anyway. And we went from there and started working on it. So, and this was the same student that didn't think she could ever turn anything in because it wasn't good enough.
You know, John Savory, the name problem-based learning, Savory and Duffy, the famous article by Savory. So he was a guest last semester. He was a student. He's now retired. But he had a publication based on that article in Educational Technology magazine on PBL, on a special issue with David Jonathan. So he became, you know, he was more famous than many of the faculty in my department at the time because that article was extremely.
Because the article. Yep.
Because the article. I had another student, Noriko Hara, who was quoted in the New York Times for her research that showed some problems with student feedback and online discourse and all, and she was on the front page of the New York Times. You know, you never know. And now she's a faculty in informatics at IU. So as a student, you can get published in extremely high profile situations. So
yep, it is. This has been fun.
Yep. Thank you, Tim. Thank you for hanging around.
Thank you, guys.
Extra minutes.
All right.
I will stop the recording. Everyone can say thank you in the chat window. I'm recording right now.